So our program is that our brother Ryan is going to speak to us on the subject of what is a cult and where do they come from. We won't have a closing hymn today because Brother Ryan's expecting it's going to go reasonably lengthy today, so that's why there's no hymn number on the board. So I'll now hand over to you.
Thanks, Brother Graham. Good afternoon, everyone, and thanks for being here. I'm not planning on going for hours, so you don't need to be too scared there. So what is a cult and where does it come from? It's a very interesting question with a lot of resources we can use to try and answer this question. Now, answering the first half of the question, what is a cult, isn't actually as straightforward as what we may think or what it would seem. And the second half of that question, where does it come from, is also going to take a little bit of work. So what is a cult? How do we determine what is a cult and what isn't? Now, according to various resources, these are the typical characteristics that define a cult. A cult is a group which is typically led by a charismatic and self-appointed leader who tightly controls its members, requiring unwavering devotion to a set of beliefs and/or practices. These beliefs and practices are typically considered outside the norms of society and are usually seen as being extreme. The term itself is mostly used in a negative and most of the time in a derogatory way, rather than just being a way of defining a group. In general, the term cult is applied to any new religious movement or other social group in general where they are defined by their unusual religious, spiritual, or philosophical beliefs and practices, or their common interest in a particular person, object, or goal. Now, it's important to note that although the vast majority of cults are based on religion, they can also have no religious basis at all. And I think most people don't actually realise that. They are not exclusively religious. But the common theme for all cults is that the basis for their group or their common interest is seen by the general population as being extreme. Now, I've got a very quick and easy example of this. If I was to form a group that worshipped this, my iPhone, just my iPhone, not yours, just mine. If I was to form a group that worshipped my iPhone, and the way we worship it is we meet up once a week and we sacrifice cockroaches to it. Now, there's nothing wrong with liking iPhones to the point that you want to worship it, but also to love them that much, to want to make sacrifices to my iPhone, not any, just mine, I think that's definitely outside what society would consider to be normal behaviour. That would be very extreme. Now, the term cult can also be used to describe less extreme groups, but these aren't typically what people think of when they hear of this word cult. It seems to come down to what perceived danger the cult or group represents to general society. For example, as we know, there was a group called the KKK, or the Ku Klux Klan in America, and it's probably the most well-known cult in history, and it's well documented the trouble that they caused society. Now, in contrast to that, my iPhone cult, do you think anyone's really going to care that I'm in here sacrificing cockroaches to it once a week? I don't think that's really going to bother anyone. But in either case, there's the same underlying cause for the formation of these cults, which is an excessive devotion to an ideology or an object. So in the English-speaking word, the term cult usually carries very derogatory and negative connotations, and that's especially so in religious circles. Now, academics these days mainly view this term as being subjective, so it depends on who's using the word as to what the word actually means, as it is most often used as a way to attack any religious group that has differing beliefs to their own practices or beliefs. And it's sometimes described as being a shorthand way of simply saying or referring to a religion that I don't like. Now, some cults can form spontaneously through a various number of unique combinations of factors within society, like my iPhone cult. Say it's the last iPhone in existence for some reason and we have a plague of cockroaches. Put those two things together, you can end up with that scenario. Mostly though, these groups are planned with a particular purpose in mind. They almost always involve people being highly controlled by a hierarchy and are sometimes compared to many political, now this is a tricky word, totalitarian systems. Now, if that's the first time you've heard that word, here's an example of a totalitarian system. Nazi Germany, under the ruler of Hitler, is the best example of that. And we all know how that went. It is when there is a head figure dictating how everything functions, with seemingly harsh consequences for anyone who resists or anyone who simply speaks out against it. So why are religious cults the most common type? Now, because operating under the guise of religion allows these groups to hide behind the freedom of religious belief protections that many governments allow. So you can use religion as a front and be protected by law. And also, because religion is faith-based, it's actually impossible for anyone to prove with 100% confidence that a certain belief system is absolutely false. That's what makes religious-based cults very hard to identify, and why groups can seem to get away with doing bad things for such a long period of time before authorities decide we need to get involved here, there's a problem. Now, we're going to focus a little bit on the actual damage cults can do for the next 10 minutes or so. Shortly, I'll share an experience with, it was actually a non-religious cult from a personal contact, and I've been given permission to share this experience. The person won't be named and the group won't be named, so if there appears to be anything missing in the detail, there's a reason for it. So we start. It started as a friendship with the founder of this group that made you feel very loved and supported and freed from many judgments and confines in your daily life. He said he was a life coach but never delved into any detail. As he spent increasing amounts of time with us and told us how much he loved our way of thinking, we naturally inquired more about what he did. What kind of coaching did he teach that could afford him such wealth and stability and ease with life? He called it ease, joy, and glory. Being religious ourselves, we thought maybe this man could be interested in the Bible. In retrospect, I see this was his first step in recruiting. He was waiting for us to inquire and be curious, so he knew where to drop the bait. His reply was smooth and well rehearsed. You don't need coaching. You have your life all sorted out. Keep in mind this went on over a period of weeks. While this doesn't sound bad on face value, excuse me, this is in fact a tactic of saying the opposite of what you want to hear. We now know this is referred to as strategic self-anti-conformity. we can see the start of being manipulated. This tactic of reverse psychology to encourage someone else to do what is actually desired. It was this strategy of friendship, saying that you don't need these tools to be successful, but making us more eager to find out what this secret to success actually was. He was a larger-than-life Texan who drew attention everywhere he went and splashed money around like it was water. Slowly, more and more of his group were introduced to us. We always considered ourselves separate to them, so we didn't feel threatened. They would each give us a little more info about these classes, and even though we were very curious about the whole setup, we were not part of them and believed we were in full control of the situation. The founder and his hierarchy paid for us to go to their luxury holiday retreats. By this stage, even though we hadn't seen what went on in a class, we had become friends with the many people that did pay and attend classes. The founder had taught them to have a separate account, as in bank account, they could use for these classes or anything related. It wasn't clear why we seemed to get special treatment when everyone else had to pay heavily for everything to do with these classes. We were being put on pedestals, and because of this, we felt sure we were in no danger and still had full control. It all felt a bit bizarre and too good to be true, and we would even laugh about it. Eventually, we were allowed and required to go to classes, only we did not have to pay, so the joke just continued in our mind. Everyone else had to pay, and they were in fact encouraged to sell their homes and everything they owned to pay for these classes. They were encouraged to borrow as much money as possible, as they were promised more money, happiness, and power than they could imagine once they learned the skills to have what they called complete conscious awareness. That's what they were selling. We thought these were skills purely to help them in their lives and businesses. The kinds of people that were members were many business owners and the very ill and disabled. When the very ill died, the founder said it was because they chose to die rather than to live. There were levels of classes to attend, and at each level there were phrases we had to constantly repeat after every second sentence the class facilitator spoke. Repeating words and phrases endlessly were also said to be tools to attract what you wanted, like health, wealth, and happiness. They used to put these phrases on recordings and play them over and over for hours. Normal life activities included having these phrases on repeat, which of course led to people being segregated from their friends and family because it was just a bit too strange for them. He would be in contact with us many times a day, claiming that we were vital to his peace of mind. Each class had massage tables, apparently for healing, during the class, and they would perform these healings under blankets as the class went on. The higher level people could attend the lower level classes and charge large sums for their higher healing abilities that they apparently had. They did this to people who were ill and struggling in life. They had no actual qualifications in any aspect of this. The levels were a sort of rank, and once you reached a facilitator level, you could teach classes yourself and charge the big money, with a large portion going to the founder. There were hundreds of these facilitators all over the world. Nobody had any real qualifications, and all of this was made up by the founder and changed continuously whenever he wanted. They taught that your body was eternal. They called themselves humanoids, as mere humans did not have the conscious awareness to live forever, cure disease, have money, etc. Because we believed we were observers rather than participants, we felt we weren't really involved and never got involved in these healings that went on during classes, as we didn't understand it. In reality, we were kidding ourselves with false security, and we're to find out much later that these activities sometimes resulted in rape and child abuse and even murder. Nobody could voice concerns about any behaviour. Only the founder could change things, as he apparently had total conscious awareness, and these rules could change at any time. The trap here for the people attending was to get this total conscious awareness, they needed to attend more classes. It's the only way to learn, more and more and more classes. The classes cost $2,000 an hour. Imagine anyone paying for something where you don't really know what you're getting or know how you are getting it. However, this was all done so slowly over a long period of time that you actually started to believe that you needed it. It was in your best interest. In classes, the founder would humiliate people. It was a tool of oppression and it made you scared. These severe public humiliations left people feeling hopeless and helpless. Lacking the ability to make effective appeals on their own behalf, they had no discernible way back, no avenue to recover or to have a better future. He, as in the founder, was a psychopath, a sadist, and a narcissist. By this point, all family and friends for most people had been cut off, so surviving without having this conscious awareness and the rest of the group seemed impossible. There was no other way but to continue doing what you were doing. The founder convinced or cleverly manipulated us into opening a business with him, as so many others had done. Now, still, for some reason, believing that we were in control, we went along with this, and it is the proof to the power that he had. We did what we were told, and we worked without pay. So many things were questionable, and so many things didn't sit well with us at this point. We had lost touch with our real life, and we began to question all of it. Now, as a result, we were cut off so sharply and fiercely when we did this. We were bewildered and treated like criminals by all the members of the group and our entire network of business suppliers. The accountants got involved and the founder took the entire business, claiming that we actually owed him several $1 million. We sold everything we had to pay back various bills, which weren't actually ours, but we were liable because of the technicality of how the business was set up. We now had to start again and find out who we were. Nobody believed we had been in a cult, insisting that it couldn't be because it wasn't a religious group. We felt blamed and judged by all. The brainwashing or conditioning was the hardest to erase. The phrases are still inside our head today. A reminder of the evil that we survived. Never should a person be allowed so deep in your head to control you like that. For us, we have learned keeping God in the forefront of our mind is the only way of truly being loved and having hope in a real plan and purpose with mankind and the earth. The survivors that I know who have got out have never fully recovered. This particular cult is here in Brisbane. It's all over Australia, is not a religion, and is very rightly currently being investigated by authorities. So a lot of detail there. It all sounds a bit grim. So what now? What do we do with all that information? I think we've quite well established what cults are, for the most part, and they are dangerous and destructive groups within our society. But where do they come from? Why do humans continue with this behaviour when we know the damage that it causes? Now, this is my personal opinion. I'll stress this. This is my personal opinion, but the personal account that we just finished listening to happened to mention something that I think is a common factor behind every cult that involves a central figure of power and involves controlling all of its members. It was this line: he was a psychopath, a sadist, and a narcissist. It is that third word here that we will focus on for the rest of today. Now, this word is many hours of study in itself, so for the sake of time, we will do a very quick overview of what narcissism is. The term narcissist isn't a new one, but the understanding of what it means from a psychology point of view has been greatly increased in the last 10 years or so. It is actually a diagnosable disorder. It's a word that gets thrown around a lot in our social media-obsessed, celebrity-driven culture, and we often use it to describe someone who seems excessively vain or just full of themselves. But that's partially correct, but not really the whole story. In psychological terms, narcissism doesn't simply mean loving yourself. It's actually more accurate to say that people with narcissistic personality disorder, or NPD, which I'll refer to from now on, are in love with an idealised or grandiose image of themselves. So not who they actually are, what they want to be. And they're in love with this inflated self-image simply because it allows them to avoid any deep feelings of insecurity. So they're just a bit of a show-off. Where's the harm in that? The danger with this is, in order to prop up this grandiose or infallible image of themselves, they have to work really hard to maintain that image to everyone around them. And this is where the dysfunctional attitudes and behaviours come in, as they need those around them to believe in the same world that they have created in their mind. To do that, it requires many forms of manipulation, or what you would call brainwashing. Narcissistic personality disorder involves a pattern of self-centered, arrogant thinking and behaviour, a lack of empathy and consideration for other people, and an excessive need for admiration. Others often describe people with NPD as cocky, manipulative, selfish, patronising, and demanding. And this way of thinking and behaving can show in any and every area of the narcissist's life, from work and friendships to family and also loving relationships. People with NPD are extremely resistant to changing their behaviour, even when it is causing them problems. Their tendency is to turn the blame on others. It is never their fault. It's simply, they wouldn't have these problems if you just did what they said. What's more, they are extremely sensitive and react badly to even the slightest criticisms, disagreements, or even perceived slights, which they view as personal attacks. For the people in the narcissist's life, it's often easier just to go along with their demands to avoid the coldness or the rages, and it can be either one. It can either be nothing or it can be everything. The simple solution of choosing not to fight for the sake of peace. The problem is, this doesn't actually stop the behaviour, and it reinforces in their mind that they are in fact correct because you're going along with it. The best way to summarise all of this is it is extremely self-seeking behaviour that has little to no regard for how it impacts people around them and is actually portrayed as a public service. Now, there's a lot more to it than that, and MPD can show itself in various different ways. It's not just one specific type. There's actually 4 main types that are referred to. Some narcissists you can spot almost immediately. Others are very discreet in how they go about it, and you only see beneath the surface when things or people aren't serving them as they expect they should. Now, I absolutely, how many narcissists are there out there? That's a question. How common are they? I absolutely guarantee everyone in this room, me included, have come across narcissists in our life. And we may even have problems with 1 or 2 right now. So, we're still just throwing on information that doesn't sound that good. Where do we go? What do we do about people with NPD when we come across them? How do we avoid getting caught up in all of these destructive systems of behaviour? And this is a link to cults. It is a destructive way of living your life. Now, as there was a bit of a spoiler earlier, for people who are here, hold on. Connecting. Yep. Yeah, there we go. I'm going to hand over to my good friend Dr. Phil, as he is much more qualified to talk on this subject than what I am. This is, how do you handle a narcissist?
How do you deal with these people? How do you live with these people? How do you get along with these people? And how do you recognize if you actually have one of these people in your life? I recommend that you don't try and fix a narcissist. I've made stabs at that. I've made efforts at that. When I was a young lion and was going to heal the world, I'd take on whatever. It's above your pay grade. You're not going to do it. I'm not going to do it. Now, there are those that believe that you're not going to change a narcissist no matter what you do. And people ask me, well, why not? Can't anybody learn to change? And sure, in theory, anybody can learn to change. People ask me where these folks come from. Why does somebody turn out to be a narcissist and somebody else doesn't? And isn't it true if you kind of know that, then maybe you know where to start working on them to change them? Nobody really knows where this comes from. I'll tell you what some of the primary theories are. Maybe it'll give you some insight to excuse yourself from feeling responsible for fixing it. You know, people ask, is this something genetic? Is it environmental? I think the research is very ambiguous, but I think most people would agree that it's a learned behavior. Most people would agree that they come from the extremes of parenting. They either had a parent that was way overprotective and, carried the kid around on a satin pillow and made the child believe that they were entitled by turning him into spoiled brats. And I always say, we're not raising children, we're raising adults. And so whatever you do with your child, that's what you're creating as an adult. So I said the extremes of parenting. One is you've treated your child in such a way that they become a spoiled brat child, so they become a spoiled brat adult. And the other extreme of parenting, of course, is if they've been neglected or abused. And so this is a reaction of, I'm going to be so arrogant. It's kind of a get them before they get me strategy in life, where they just become so self-protective by being arrogant and haughty and entitled that nobody's ever going to do that to me again, because I'm going to put myself above everybody so I can't be hurt. I'm going to fly above the crowd where I can't be hurt. These are theories. I'm not presenting this to you as fact. I'm telling you what psychodynamicists say when they say, look at the parents if you want to understand why somebody turns out the way they do as an adult. Now, does that make it easier for you to suffer these people or not? Maybe it does. If you are not that way and you have empathy, maybe understanding it gives you a little bit of staying power. But as I said before, I'm one of those people that thinks anybody can change. I'm the incurable optimist, but these are people that just don't have a good prognosis. There's some mental illness problems that have good prognosis, like phobias. If somebody has a phobia, anxiety, you can deal with that, and it's got a very good prognosis. Personality disorders don't have the best prognosis because in the individual's eyes, what they're doing is working for them. And so their belief is, why fix what ain't broke? A narcissist doesn't respond well in part because they don't see a problem. They think they're special. They think they're unique. They think they got it going on. They live in a fantasy world in which they are the top dog. They are the unique, entitled, special individual. So what is there to fix? It's the rest of you that have the problem. Catch up. Get your game together. I don't have the problem, you have the problem. So you can't change what you don't acknowledge. Y'all have heard me say that. A narcissist is not going to acknowledge that they have a problem. So why would they have a to-do list? And the answer is they wouldn't. They don't. They don't have a to-do list. Most personality disorders don't have a to-do list because they think what they're doing is protecting them, working for them, getting them what they want. So if you're not going to change them, what are you going to do? Well, you're going to have to learn to deal with them. You're going to have to learn to not allow yourself to be sucked down by these people, to not get into their ego suck hole where you just get pulled down into this dark, bottomless pit where you cannot ever do enough to make these people happy. And the first thing I want you to do is establish some boundaries and recognize it's not your job to fix them. You couldn't fix them if it was your job. And you cannot let them have the power to determine how you feel about who you are. If you give them the power to determine your self-worth in a relationship, whether it's romantic or as a family member or at work, whatever the situation, if you give them the power to determine your validation, your self-worth, I promise you, you're going to lose because they have to put you down in order for them to feel better. It's what I call leveling. They either have to build themselves up so they feel equal to or superior, or they have to shoot you down so they don't think you've got anything over on them. That's leveling. They can't be in a one-down position ever. So they always have to, in some way, keep you from having any advantage. And if you feel good about yourself, if you are at peace with yourself, if you think you're in touch with your authentic self, if you have a good sense of self-worth, a good definition of self, they can't suffer that. because it gives you a sense of power and peace that they just can't endure. So they have to take that away from you. They have to tear that down. You cannot let that happen. So that's why I say you've got to set up a boundary, and you cannot take the bait, and you cannot be the bait. And let me tell you what I mean by that. These people are going to say things that anybody would find offensive. They're going to violate your rights. And it's not just being assertive. Assertiveness is when someone acts in a way to protect their own rights, but they do it without stepping on anyone else's rights. Aggressiveness is when people assert their rights and they trample all over someone else's rights. That's what a narcissist does. They do it by gaslighting, and I'm going to tell you what I mean by that. And if you're dealing with a narcissist, get out your fire extinguisher, because you're going to get gaslit. They are going to talk to you in such a way that anything that goes wrong is your fault. And anything that they do is your fault. You're going to hear phrases, I mentioned a few of them before. I didn't say that. I'm not mad. It's not that big a deal. Why are you being so sensitive? Why are you blowing this all out of proportion? What is wrong with you? And it all keeps coming back to what's wrong with you. And they're happy to answer that question. You're too sensitive. That's the gaslighting phrases you're going to hear. And if you don't have a boundary, you're going to take that bait and start questioning yourself whether or not, well, maybe it's me. Maybe it's me. But what do I want you to do? I want you to remember this conversation that we're having right now. I told you this was going to be a little different, that I just wanted it to be a conversation. And I want you to remember when this happens, you know what? When I was on my walk and I was listening to Dr. Phil in my earbuds, this is exactly what he was talking about.
There we go. Thanks, Dr. Phil, for helping me out there. Now, hopefully everyone's followed my path through the subject today and how we've got to where we are. If we come across cults in the world, if we come across people who are like this, it doesn't matter if they're a part of a cult or not, it's the same thing we're talking about. It is very destructive behaviour that we don't want to get involved in. So it appears like we may have done a big detour from the actual subject of cults right there, but I personally believe that NPD is probably the main driving force behind the most destructive cults in the world. Just think about it. The people who put themselves in charge, what do they get out of doing that? All of those things. They get the glory, they get the recognition, they get people worshipping them. It is all for themselves. It is all about controlling a big group. It's all about a grandiose image on a massive scale. People hanging off every single word that they say. They're never accountable for their errors. And if something goes wrong, there's always someone else that they can blame for the problem. Now, what is the reason why some cults are more successful than others? Why does that happen? The simple question is, we're all humans, we're all different. Simply, not all narcissists are good at selling their illusion to the public. But simply, not everyone can be a good used car salesman. That's what it is, trying to sell something that's not actually reality. Now, to finish up, can the Bible offer us any help on this subject? There are many aspects of cults and how they treat people which contradict the teachings of the Bible. Now, rather than go into all of this and start picking it apart and pull out verses that talk about treating people badly or wanting to be in charge or vainglory, all that sort of stuff. We'll finish with two passages which I think summarise where we've ended up today. First one is from 1 John chapter 2, verses 15 and 16. This is read from the King James Version. Love not the world, neither the things that are in the world. If any man love the world, the love of the Father is not in him. This is the key verse. For all that is in the world, think about these three things: the lust of the flesh, the lust of the eyes, and the pride of life, is not of the Father, but is of the world. Three driving forces in cults. Lastly, we turn to Galatians chapter 5, and we'll finish by reading verses 19 to 26. And I will read this from a different version, the NLT, as I think it makes a little bit more sense with the words that it uses. Galatians chapter 5, verses 19 to 26 says, "When you follow the desires of your sinful nature, the results are very clear. Sexual immorality, impurity, lustful pleasures, idolatry, sorcery, hostility, quarreling, jealousy, outbursts of anger, selfish ambition, dissension, division, envy, drunkenness, wild parties, and other sins like these. Let me tell you again, as I have before, that anyone living that sort of life will not inherit the kingdom of God." Now, I'll just pause there. Think about all those words that were used. How much of them stem from selfish behaviour? Self-centred behaviour. Who cares about the consequence to those around us? Continuing on, but the Spirit produces this kind of fruit in our lives. Now think about these. These are all selfless things: love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, and self-control. Those things don't just benefit us, they benefit everyone around us. It is selfless behaviour. There is no law against these things. Those who belong to Jesus Christ have nailed the passions and desires of their sinful life to his cross and crucified them there. Since we are living by the Spirit, let us follow the Spirit's leading in every part of our lives. Let us not become conceited or provoke one another or be jealous of one another.